And we're going to get into hacking web APIs, right? And as you can see, let me go back here for a second. As you can see, this is what we do at Red Siege. We do a lot of assume breach. All right. Again, we do a lot of assume breach, red teaming, penetration testing, web app, and purple team, all the good stuff. A little bit about myself. I'm a senior security consultant at Red Siege. I got started in security back in 2014. I've been in the industry for like 17 years. Well, 18 now. Wow, time flies. It's 2021. I'm still in 2020 mode, but oh well. I'm also a retro gamer, huge fans of retro games. For those of you that know me, I post a lot of this stuff on Twitter as well too. On Twitter, I go by the name BSD Bandit. Also have a couple of alphabets past my name. This is just some of them. Wireless for OSCP and OSWP. So enough about me. Of course, this is like my favorite pastime is being excited. And today is super exciting because we're going to talk about hacking web APIs. And this is just going to be more so from just like a basic standpoint, not the advanced stuff that could come later, possibly in part 2. But today we're just going to focus on just the basics and the fundamentals of hacking web APIs. So before we get into hacking web APIs, let's see what type of APIs there are out there to actually hack. And as you can see here, we have SOAP, REST, and GraphQL web APIs, right? So with SOAP, in my past adventures, I've noticed that a lot of legacy apps actually use SOAP on the back end. So legacy meaning like it could be even PHP, it could be a Java app. I've seen Ajax. I've also seen jQuery actually use SOAP as one of their backend APIs, which is pretty cool as well. But the only thing, there was a lot of limitation there. It was only using XML. So there was a lot of limitation there. So later on, we have REST. Now with REST API, which is mainly used more like modern web applications, right? A lot of web apps use API. It just got more attractive with developers. They have a combination that they use, like not only just XML, but JSON YAML. It's stateless and it's actually lightweight. So that's what was cool about REST APIs, which is going to be the focal point of our actual talk today. So then you have GraphQL, which I'm starting to see a lot more out there about like GraphQL APIs. And there's some cool exploits that's out there related to GraphQL, but that's for like another time, another talk. But the focal point today is actually REST API. And what we're going to be doing as we're doing, you can apply these same fundamentals to SOAP or REST, whatever you run into, you can apply the fundamentals across the board. So now that we know what types of APIs are actually out there to hack, what is a REST API? I'll tell you what a REST API is not. It's not an official protocol. It's not a protocol. It's more so like a guidance. It's more so like a you could say like more so like a secure, like a guideline. You know how like when you're testing like web applications and you're using like the OWASP top 10 list as like a guideline to test the web application, it's no different for developers when they're developing REST API, right? So they're developing a specific API that's based on the architectural constraints and the everything within REST itself. So now you can use REST with not only hooking into the HTTP protocol, but you can use REST to also hook into like FTP and other services as well too. So that's what makes it like insanely flexible. All right. And now that we figured out, hey, here's the type of APIs that are out there to hack. We know what a REST API is. Now let's get into the approach of actually hacking a web API, right? So when I'm faced with a web API, I have to get in that mindset. So there's a different mindset when it comes to hacking APIs in general. You know, I look at an application, whether it's web or anything, but in this case, web. As you can see, the top 10 here and the list, the guidance, as what we were talking about earlier. I look at a web application, think of it as an actual house, right? And the APIs are doors in each room. So you have a kitchen API, you have several bedrooms, you have a bathroom, you have a back door, a backyard. These are all little doors inside the house of an actual web application. And inside each door, there's information. So in this case, you want something from the kitchen to say, hey, give me some eggs, give me some utensils or whatever else, right, from the API. And that's all more so from a mindset. So when I'm going into actually attacking API, I visualize that tunnel mindset. Say, hey, this is the house that I'm hacking against. I see there's a door here. I see there's a door there. Let me see what information I can extract from that particular door. Now that we're in the right mental space, now that I understand, okay, this is what I'm going to be attacking, this is what I'm focused on, I'm looking at that house again, and I see these little doors. Now I want to understand the attack surface, which is very important when you're attacking APIs, right? So when you identify that, now if it's a pen test, more so, and this is what you would ask for on the kickoff call, you would ask for more so, hey, I know you want me to focus on attacking the API. Do you have the documentation? Now, there's been only 1 or 2 instances that I can actually remember that did not have any documentation. And the reason being the person that was in charge of documenting API actually left the company. So that's what the reason for the pen test was in the first place. But 90% of the time, you really do get like the documentation back. So if you got the documentation, 10 points. Now, if you don't have any documentation, the next step that you can actually take is actually looking at either a census.io, a virus total, or my personal favorite, any-api.com. The cool part about any-api.com is the fact that it has like documentation for, I think it's like 14 or 1500 public APIs out there. So it's a treasure trove of information. So who knows, your API actually might be amongst the any API documentation crowd. You never know, but it's something that you should actually try if you don't have the documentation, or if the client doesn't have the documentation to submit to you to test the API. That would be the next steps. And then now, if you don't see anything in the any API website, now your next step is actually just manually playing with the API and trying to figure out how it functions. And you can do that. And this is the steps that I actually take. So I actually say, okay, if it's running version, let's say version 2, right? The first thing I'm going to try is switch back to version 1. Or if it only shows version 1 in the actual like URL, then I'm going to change to like version 2, version 3. And the most I'll probably do is like version 4 to see the differences in the behavior, to see what I actually get back. Because a lot of times you could get some good information. You can get a sense of how the API function. And I always look at this from the mental state. Version 1 has majority of the mistakes. The first version of any software has majority of the mistakes. So if there's a version 2, and I go back to version 1, a lot of times you might find version 1 of the API to have some more vulnerabilities, right? And as you can see here, this is just like an example of the API documentation in general, what it looks like if a client, or if you find it from any API.com or Versal, however you do it. But this is kind of like the structure of how the API functions. And in this case, again, our focal point is REST API. And of course, REST API uses JSON in this case, right? So now that we have enough, we know what the API that we're going to be testing, we understand the attack surface. Now that we have all that in place and we know how, we have a gist of how the API actually functions, now it's time to break into some authentication. Let's test for broken authentication. And you can do that in several different ways depending on how the API actually functions. A lot of times I'll even try to actually bypass authentication, and as you can see, an example here is just like, in this case is on version 3 of the API, but it just depends on how the API actually logs in. You can also try for like user enumeration. You could try to brute force usernames or for passwords. Depends on the function of the API and what it does as far as like authentication is concerned. A lot of times I'll try those methods first, and then I'll come back and say, okay, I couldn't brute force usernames. I couldn't brute force passwords. I couldn't enumerate usernames. Okay, what's left to try? Authentication bypass. So a lot of times I'll go ahead and try the good old fashioned SQL authentication bypass, SQL injection authentication bypass. So, and as you can see, this is just an example here. With this particular application, as you can see, like I just threw in like a test username and then of course a test password at first, and of course I didn't get any information there. It gave me a username and password not found. Username and password, could not authenticate. So the next step that I tried was actually, let me see if I could bypass authentication and just see if I could authenticate that way. And lo and behold, in this situation, which I'll show you after, which is pretty much just part of the whole SQL injection process, which I'll show you that in a second, the results of that. But a lot of times you're able to bypass authentication with using those methods. But if not, then you move on to the next thing, which is what we're going to do here, is actually testing for SQL injection, right? Which is cool. Everybody loves SQL injection, or in some case, there could be no SQL injection, right? Depends if it's running like MongoDB, which is the most popular NoSQL database. I think there's a couple out there like CouchDB. Correct me if I'm wrong. But there's several others out there. But the most popular one that I've seen is MongoDB. And of course, when you're testing for injection, you're pretty much testing for not only SQL or NoSQL, but you also want to test for command injections or even HTML injections or cross-site scripting. It just depends, because here's the thing I've also learned too. When you're testing for any type of injection, try to test for cross-site scripting, because a lot of times you can easily score, like, say, stored-based cross-site scripting and vice versa. So you could do a combination of injection tests in this part of API testing, because as we all know, 90% of this stuff connects back to some sort of actual database. So you want to look at that and just say, okay, you know what? Let me try for these different combinations of testing in general, right? And this is just a result of SQL injection. As you can see here, in this particular instance, I was able to actually get the token. And then from within that token, I can submit the token and I can authenticate or do anything else, right? But now that I have the token, let me see if I can actually see if I can get something back by trying just a basic like SQL injection. As you can see here, I just put together like just a quick like the union statement, just pretty much looking for the specific version of the attack in general. So, and once I did that, these are the results that I actually got back, which you always want to validate the response too. And I also want to plug in here too. When you're doing SQL injection, when you're doing manual SQL injection, you're not always going to get an error message. It's very rare now that you get an error message with SQL injection. A lot of times you have to, and this is why I say validate the response, because a lot of times when you're manually testing something, you have to validate the behavior, how the application behaves when you're injecting your payload, because you never know. It could redirect to a page. That doesn't mean there's no error. It can, the page could do something real weird and crazy, but that doesn't mean that that's not vulnerable. So I just wanted to put that tidbit out there as a tip. When you're testing web APIs, this is stuff that you want to look for. In this case, of course, I got lucky. I got a nice little cute response back from Ubuntu. Thank you, Ubuntu. And token and just password information. Well, no information in the password table, but again, it was good information to get back and help me to move on to the next step, right? So now we've tested for broken authentication. I've tested for SQL injection and other injection types, whether it's command or NoSQL or even HTML injection, right? And enumeration and brute force passwords, right? Now, you almost always want to test for IDOR, especially when dealing with API attacks, right? So, and for those of you not familiar with IDOR, it's more so just like pretty much, for example, when you see an application and say like you click on the page and it brings up, okay, ID equals 1 or 2, right? And if you change that particular ID to like 0 and you gain access to like an admin page, that's the result of an IDOR attack. For those of you who are not familiar with IDOR in general. And these are things that are most certainly in APIs in general, because, and just want to just bring this up as well too, when with APIs, in some organizations, it's a new thing. Like they've probably locked down the application, but they haven't locked down the API itself. So that's why I say it's two different ways of thinking when you're testing applications, because you also want to say, okay, you may have the application locked down, but you might not have the API locked down, and it might allow IDOR, it might allow access to specific pages that you might not have access to when you're going through the front door. The front door might be locked, but there might be a window open in the kitchen API. There might be a window open in the bedroom API, and you're coming in through the window and actually gaining the information that you need. So that's why it's important to really like test for IDOR in this case. And in any case, you know, you just want to be sure that you're touching all the points and everything else, right? So now that you've touched on that, of course, and just pretty much what I just explained what IDOR actually is. Now that we tested for IDOR, we've tested for injection attacks, SQL. Now we want to test for XML attacks. I remember earlier I was saying, and this can apply to any API, whether it's SOAP, whether it's GraphQL, or, well, mainly SOAP and REST, because GraphQL uses JSON, but you can actually try to see if you can get something through API by changing the actual character set. So in this case, and for those of you who are not familiar with XML injection, it's pretty much just another form of injecting a payload into an XML-based page. Some people call it XXE injection. They're pretty much the same thing. So it's not much of a difference there. But you always want to make sure that you're testing it. And this is what I say, when you're testing the REST API, you can change the application type to XML, hit submit from within burp repeater or whatever proxy that you're actually using. And if it has some type of XML application, you will actually get an XML page back. You'll actually get something back in the response related to XML, which is pretty awesome. Now you can do this for, well, SOAP by default has XML injection, so you can easily test for XML injection this same way, except that you don't have to really change anything because the XML is already there within that application. But with REST, you want to change it over from JSON to XML if you want to test for XML injection. And just to show you an example of what an XML injection looks like, as you can see here, I just wanted to see, you know, I'm pretty sure a lot of times the first thing that I'm thinking is like, hey, this is a Linux box. So it's just a mental thing. You could try to see if there's Windows. You could try something to check for a Windows file, but I always, by default, always try to check for the password file for starters when I want to do an XML inject, right? So, so as you can see here, I checked for the password, and again, you see the token, you see the username, you see the password. So that's my injection, and then this is what I got back. And look at all the goodies that I got back. I mean, Ubuntu just loves me, right? So as you can see, you see the Apache server, you see the version of Ubuntu, but look what we see here. We see root, we see the paths, so like user bin, user S bin, games. Like you're actually seeing the actual password file within the XML document, which is pretty awesome. So and this is how you would go about testing far as like XML injection is concerned. So, I mean, there's other ways. I just showed you just an example, but this is what you would actually look for. And to go back just in case anyone has missed it, there you go. Your doc type, your data, of course, your entry file system, and then the password itself, right? And you can even do that for like, you can say XE host, or you can say whatever. Even try shadow too. You can try shadow because because you never know, the application that you're working with might have root level privileges, but you won't know unless you try it. That's the key to hacking anyway. it's all about trying different things to see what you get back as well too. So, all right. So now that we've hacked, we've pretty much done XML injection, we've done SQL injection, we've done user enumeration, we've done password brute forcing, we've got the lay of the land, we know how the API works, we have the documentation, we've gotten some good information so far, but we're not done yet. You also want to test brute force against an API, and it's different. I know I mentioned brute force earlier in our talk, but this is something totally different. So API has something called like rate limiting, right? And what rate limiting is, it limits the amount of calls a user or an application can send to the API. But if there's no limit on the amount of calls that can come from a user or an application to an API, what's the next step that can happen? Denial of service. And this is something that you definitely don't want. But and again, which brings us to our topic, abusing lack of rate limiting. Now, what I have learned about in this test, well, any test, if you want to test for this, please, and I beg you, please stop what you're doing. Talk to whoever is in charge of the test and said, hey, I want to test this for maybe denial of service, just to see if there's a potential denial of service within your application, right? But I repeat, do not just go off and just test this without having permission, because you could bring down a production application. It could be something that, could be something detrimental to the company's business. So you definitely want to talk with them and just say, hey, do I have permission? If they say yes, then hack away. If they say no, let it go. Trust me, I learned from experience. So the way you'll go about actually abusing like rate limiting in an API, you use our good old friend burp intruder, right? So in this case, I pretty much just highlighted like just, my simple username and password. I put together like just like a little quick simple list just to see what I could get back and see how far I can go as far as like throwing calls at it or whatnot. And again, this is just an example of what it looks like when you're actually running intruder. For those of you who are not familiar with intruder or whatnot, a lot of folks, we use it in burp to actually brute force, like say like passwords or even do username enumeration. So it's an automated way of doing it, but you can only do it if you can do it in the free version of burp, but it's very throttled. So you would need burp pro to really get a lot of usage out of intruder, right? But as you can see here, same thing, ran the intruder, got the actual attacker username, I got the email address, and I got the token, because I just want to put this tip out there. It's all about tokens. Hey, Suzanne. All right. So now we've attacked. Again, we've done our injections. We've done our abuse of the rate limiting to see if the API is vulnerable to denial of service attacks. Now that we have that, here's another thing that I like to check for as well too. And it's called like finding like sensitive data using GET requests. So it's no different than like within a web application, right? So with like for example, in a web application, right? A lot of times the session token could be in the request itself, right? This is kind of like the same thing. But the only difference is you're getting like sensitive data from an API instead of just saying, oh, okay, the token is here or whatnot. So it's kind of like the same concept, but just a little bit different. So in this case here, as you can see, I just sent the nice little request, secure store, and that was the information that I got back along with the token. Even though the token wasn't in the GET request in this case, but the server gave me the token in the response, which is just as bad. So either way should never be a good idea, right? And for anybody that's trying to fix this, just please put your token somewhere else other than a GET request or giving it back in the response, right? So this is something that you definitely want to check for when you're actually testing web APIs. Another thing that you want to check for in web APIs, if you don't have the documentation, you have the documentation, by all means, use the documentation because that's what it's there for. It wasn't written for its health. So you definitely want to use that. But in this is in the case if you don't have any type of documentation related to the API and you want to figure out if it has like the different post and put requests for the different endpoints, right? So this is something that you definitely want to check for. And you can just craft like different parameters, like how we did here. And I'll just go back up for a second. How we did here with the get and looking for the username and password. Change that to post and see what you get. You never know. You could get totally different information. You could probably get more information. You could probably get no information, but you won't know it unless you try it. So you definitely want to check for posts and especially put requests. Put requests are awesome because you know what put does? It allows you write access to something. It allows you to put something on a web server. And who knows, that API could be designed to put something on a file system on a web server. So these are things that you can actually like look at and actually check for and see, hey, you know, do I have something here? Hey, am I getting some good information back? Okay, I have a post here. Does put work here? So, and then you're getting, like I said, more of the lay of the land with APIs. Now that you've got a land, you got everything now. You got some good findings, you got some good information, you got some sensitive data. Heck, you got a token and a password file, and that's awesome. But we're still not finished. So, next thing I always like to check for is the API security misconfiguration. Now, you can do this in several different ways. When you want to test for that, and this is where, like I said, a combination of different tests come in. So, does the API use cores? I mean, there's a lot of security vulnerabilities with cores. Test for the misconfiguration of cores. Look for verbal error messages. Look for anything that might contain sensitive information. Also, too, even with these kind of attacks, even with these kind of tests, right? Also, get your OSINT on. There might be something, and this is where, like with VirusTotal or any API, or search for it within the GitHub repositories. There might be something out there related to this API misconfiguration where it's exploitable. You never know, but you got to get your OSINT on to find out. So this is something that you want to look for when you're actually testing for security misconfigurations. You want to look at this and just say, okay, I see how this is configured. Okay, this could be a problem. I see, okay, I'm getting back sensitive information. I'm getting back an error message that can lead to information. So these are things that you actually want to look at. These are things that you actually want to test for when you're going after a web API, right? And it's truly important, right? Now, here's something that I want to talk about as well too. So you notice that I took you through the process of manually testing a web API. I didn't just go for the automated slam dunk. And I'll tell you why. A lot of times you get more information out of doing it manually. I mean, the API, again, automated scans and everything gives you like the lay of the land, and that's great. But a lot of times when you're going through the manual process, you look at and this is just me and my mindset. I mean, these are just things that I just want to point out to you. Somebody could use this or they could not, but this is just good information to have. A lot of times when you're automating scans, you look at that as like, okay, icing on the cake. You look at that as something that, for example, again, the web application is a house, right? The APIs are rooms within that house, right? Look at automated scanning as a broom, okay? As a robotic broom. And now you've manually picked up a lot of the pieces you've manually picked up a lot of the clutter and everything else within that house, within those APIs. But you might have missed a few spots. And this is where automated scanning comes in. It's pretty much designed to catch the blind spots, to catch the spots that you've missed. So we always want to keep that mentality when we're testing for this stuff and not rely on this. I've seen a lot of situations where, okay, we scanned this API, okay, and then there's your report and it's done. And no, This is just the beginning. So that's why I took you through the manual process first, and not just say, oh, okay, just scan this, and you have a list of a list of things that you could try out. You could do it either way, though. You can actually start out with the automated broom to sweep the house, but I'd rather try to pick up the pieces first. You learn more that way, and you learn more about the house and the rooms in the house and what makes it tick and what doesn't. So I want to show you here, like just the different tools that are out there. If you have to do some automated fuzzing, again, there is Postman for API testing if you have the money. But today I'm just going to show you like the free alternatives to that if you don't have the money for Postman to use that to test against like APIs in general. So this one is Astra. Astra is a tool that I tried out like a year or two ago, and it was pretty cool. And this is just showing you just an overview of what you get back when you actually run Astra. I mean, it was pretty cool. It gave some good information, you know, just to kind of fuzz to see what's actually out there. I believe they're still actively developing it. I use it once in a while here and there. Like I said, I'm more of a manual guy, but if I have to like do automated testing and I don't have a cost solution, I have to use a free version, then this is what these are the tools that I would actually use, right? But if I have the option to use Postman, I'll use Postman, call it a day. But this is what Astra looks like. Just want to just give you an overview of what options that you actually have out there. And the next option is FuzzAPI, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with. As you can see, it has a different layout. It actually has a pie chart and, of course, a couple of like informationals there. You see it informational. Oh, and look at that. A possible IDOR with just pretty much a GET request, as you can see at the bottom there, right? So this is why IDOR is actually, thinking like the application is actually live. But yeah, this is why checking for IDOR and everything is important. But we already done that already because we did it manually. So pretty much this automated scanner is just telling us something that we already know. So that's what makes it pretty awesome, you know. But far as like I said, with automated tools, you definitely just want to go that route. All right. And again, when you're testing APIs all together, just think of it as this and say, hey, and this is for anyone new to actually hacking web APIs. Look at that web application as your house. You have your little rooms, which are APIs, whether it's kitchen, whether it's bathroom or bedroom or whatever, dog house, cat house, whatever, right? Then you have, ta-da, openings. Is it a back door? Is there a window open? There's ways within the web application if the front door is closed. So you put it in that mindset, and I truly believe it'll help make testing APIs a lot easier. It's a lot similar to attacking web apps, but there's just so subtle differences, like I showed you earlier with the rate limiting, right? But again, all in all, they bleed into each other. And I just want to put this out here too. APIs can bleed into mobile app testing as well too. So it's not just web APIs. It can be mobile APIs. You can constitute the same format. You could do the same thing with testing APIs. So it's not just pretty much just web. And these are a lot of the learning sources that I came across when learning this stuff. And trust me, there's still a lot more to learn. I definitely want to get more into GraphQL because I found a lot of interesting things with that, even though they're not up here right now. But if you want to get to like say like the FuzzAPI, and you want to grab the Astra automated tools, those are there for you to download. And also the API security testing for hackers from BugCrowd. That was an awesome resource. So I got a lot out of that too. And definitely check out the OWASP project API security. That's another awesome one. So you could take that guideline and then just kind of do which I wound up doing was kind of like doing research outside of that. So using that guideline, just doing research related to like APIs and everything else. And I do believe that OWASP has a vulnerability project. So there's a couple of like vulnerable like practice resources that you can practice with as well. So these are the resources that I used to practice like attacking like web APIs. The one from GitLab, docs.gitlab.com with the API vulnerabilities, that was pretty good. And then the other one, I always mess up this name, Rahulinar. I'm saying it wrong. That's why I have it here on the screen. You definitely want to check out that vulnerable API. Those are the resources that I actually use to practice against, right? Of course, Hack the Box might have one, but that's kind of like hit or miss. You never know. But these are things that you actually want to just check out. Of course, VulnHub might have something up there as well too. I saw a couple of things as far as like with test. I think it was like Lab 26, but it was like an old Matilda image or whatnot. But your best resources would be like the one from GitLab and the other one from GitHub if you want to practice hacking web APIs in general. So I wanted to leave some time for questions because I'm pretty sure there might be a lot of questions out there. Of course, you can reach me, especially on Twitter. I pretty much live on Twitter. I just come out into the real life for air, so I pretty much live on the internet. But that's my name, BSD Bandit on Twitter. I'm also check out the blogs and whatnot at Red Siege. We have some interesting stuff coming there as well too. And this is it for me.
Cool.
So,
hey, we do have one question that just popped up. I think you just covered it, but it may have been a timing thing. But what vulnerable platforms do you suggest to develop your skills? I think you answered that on the previous slide there.
Yeah, I can go back to the previous slide here. So you definitely want to use the GitHub and the GitLab. Those were the best ones. Like using VulnHub and Hack the Box is kind of like a catch as you can. But with VulnHub, you got to kind of like really like search to see, okay, is this vulnerable to this? Because I mean, the VMs that are actually put up there could be, it could be just focus only web or reverse engineering. So you really have to read the descriptions. But I found the best way to just practice this stuff is actually through docs.gitlab and the GitHub.
Another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like network pen testing is on its way out now that web, cloud, and mobile are becoming more prevalent?
No. There will always be a need for network pen testing. Reason being is because of the fact, hey, you're going into the cloud's going to have networks. So NetPen will still be a thing. Cloud and mobile are coming in, but that doesn't mean that NetPen is on its way out because there's still a lot of companies out there that are still going to adopt. They're going to adopt cloud, yes, but they're also going to have on-prem. They'll probably just use a lot of the hybrid methods. But a lot of places are not going to just be 100% cloud or 100% on-prem. So you see a lot of hybrid.
Yeah, just to echo Charles, I'm completely with Charles on that. You're gonna have a lot of organizations who are very conservative and will never go to the cloud because they don't want to. Well, you will at some point, right? And you've got to have a way to access the cloud too, right? So you got to make sure that there's some of that there. So I think it will be the thing. I think that will be more of the death nail. Again, not all is the more decentralized, where we don't have a lot of these central resources. Everything is online. You just access it from home. So
yeah.
There's another question for you. Can you talk a little bit more about the token disclosure flaw? I've seen tokens disclosed by APIs, but sometimes there isn't an apparent way to abuse. What flaws do you usually see paired with token disclosure where it can be abused? That's a long question.
Well, more so like with tokens, it's more so just pretty much you can abuse it like far as like with session hijacking and pretty much bypassing authentication. That's where I mostly see like where tokens can be like abused for, because I mean, again, in the API world, it's all about tokens. And I mean, that's mostly where I see a lot of the attacks happening at when you want to abuse like tokens in general, if that answers your question.
I have one more here. I think Justin's got some from earlier then too.
I have a whole bunch.
Yeah. Have at it. Let's go.
Suggestions on getting more familiar with API documentation. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. I'll editorialize. It's not fun to read, but maybe Charles has a better way. I hate it.
You hate gobbling up API documentation? You know what? You got to treat it like this. So we hate like and I'm just gonna put this back here. As a kid, I hated Robitussin, right? But if I was sick, if I was sick and that was my only source of getting better, guess what? I had to chuck it up and use that Robitussin so I could get better. No different when you're using like documentation because you want to know what the API is all about. The documentation is right there for you. It's just screaming, read me, ingest me, so I can get out there and have fun. Because otherwise, if there's no way, if there's a way for you to hack it, but it's gonna be a long and painful process. And again, as you know, if you're hacking something, you want to make the process as painless as possible. Think lazy. If the documentation right there, I'm gonna look for the documentation. I'm not gonna go for the harder road and try to figure it out if the documentation laid there out there for me. It's like the open welcome mat. Walk on that carpet. The carpet's already laid out. Look at it as put that into your mentals when you're actually. I know I hate reading documentation too. It sucks. Try reading RFC. That sucks. But again, I know in order for me to understand something, this is the process I have to go through. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, let me go back because we have a bunch of questions from the go-to.
Yeah.
So let me go backwards. So first one's from a guy named Bob. How do you
Hi,
find
Bob.
undocumented APIs on a target server? Do you have to crawl the site, or is there a common catalog that it's published?
Well, a combination of both. Like you can crawl the site. I'd recommend crawling the site so you could get a feel of how it works. But then also too, get up like, and this is why I said earlier, get your OSINT on. OSINT has a lot of information out there that's just screaming to be read when it comes to attacking anything. So these are things that you want to use as part of your arsenal. And I guarantee you it's out there. If you do a lot of Google dorking, you'd be surprised the information that you get back. So use it as a combination of not only crawling the site, but actually putting OSINT into your arsenal and actually like searching for it or Google dorking and searching for that information. And you'd be surprised what you get back. I learned a lot. I learned I learned how a ton of applications, not just APIs, but how applications work just by simple Google dorking and of course crawling the site as well too.
Okay, we got another one. I think this was around the time you were talking about the SQL injection thing, but it says, wouldn't you have to know part of the XML structure to know which elements are valid? If you are changing from different type applications / JSON to XML, wouldn't you be lacking the XML struct, etc.? Which would you usually be inferred from referred or transmitted content? Does that make sense?
Well, okay, so and what I'm getting here when you're testing for if you want to check to see if there's and this is where manual comes in. And I'm going back through the entire thing. This is where manually attacking something comes in, right? So we use this as an example, right? I know the format's JSON, right? And I want to see the structure and see if it even have XML in general, right? First thing I'm just going to change it to XML just to see what comes back. If nothing comes back, there's probably not anything related to XML in that doc, right? But the only way you're going to know is, and this is why I love Burp Repeater, because again, you could constantly test like different combinations. You could take out JSON, and here's another thing too. You can remove JSON, say format equals question mark to see what happens, or asterisk. You'd be surprised what you get back. Asterisks have done me well, and you'd be surprised what information you get back. So yeah, it's just a matter of trial and error. Try to see if there's an XML document. Change where it says application / JSON, change that to XML. Change that to HTML. You'd be surprised what you get back. And you can find hidden pages that way too.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Just moved my thing. Okay. I'm assuming this is how you say this word, but it says thoughts on Vuki versus Burp versus Zap. Or
Okay.
Vuki versus Burp or Zap.
Okay. So Zap, and I haven't used that in a long time. Zap, when you wanted, and Burp has improved on this, but when you wanted to test SOAP, I used Zap. When I wanted to test SOAP web services, I used Zap. Zap had a better way of handling SOAP. and this is a long time ago. So I'm pretty sure burp has improved in that area since then. But 90% of what I'm using, and like with Zuki, I haven't even used Zuki. I spend a lot of my time with burp because it's so custom. Burp Pro, excuse me. I like burp Pro because it's more like customizable, and you can just, you can, if you're a Python coder, if you're a Java coder, if you're even Ruby, like you can code up some interesting plugins. I'm currently working on a plugin now that's going to be written in Python.
Awesome. Okay, we have what OSINTing is possible in misconfiguration portion.
You could do, like I said, any, like, for example, GitHub. GitHub has a treasure trove of information out there. I usually use GitGot, but there's other scripts that you can actually use to automate that process. I use GitGot. I use, of course, any API documentation, because it literally could have the documentation up there and you not know, but it has like over 1,400 public APIs. The entire documentation for that API. So that's to be the first place I start. Virus total, because it could be someone that's, well, I'll just say that's smart enough to just say, okay, I'll just upload this to Virus Total, or even Threat Crowd. I mean, there's a lot of public sites out there that you can actually search for, and even LinkedIn for that matter. It just depends, because there's always a user that might say, hey, I may need to save this documentation for later. Let me just put this up here. Let me put this in my LinkedIn profile. I'm just using LinkedIn as an example. That may not be the case. Or let me save this here so I can grab the notes later. Let me send it to myself. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's ways of, actually doing that. I just gave you like just a couple examples if you want to do like OSINTing. But definitely start with any API. .com. I definitely recommend that.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for alternatives to Argin by, I'm assuming it's SumDev, but written in leet speak. So Argin by SumDev for parameter brute forcing of endpoints?
Personally, I don't have any other alternatives, honestly.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's see. How do you recommend testing unknown APIs with no documentation or only internal documentation?
Oh, simple. It's just, now that's a matter of, again, we're going back to manually, right? Like I said, when you're identifying the attack surface, when you're using burp or zap or Zuki, whatever one you're using, and you're actually going to the API itself, or even redirected to the API, a lot of times you'll see like a V1 or V2 or even like a V3 as an example. As we can see here, I'll just go back through. There you go. Like say, it don't even have to say API. That could just be /V3 login. It's going to be some type of API, and then that's when you just start playing around with different things. You change it to like say version 1. Version 1 of anything is going to have the most mistakes. So you want to look at it from that standpoint and say, okay, this is version 1. This is the first time they're actually using this version. Let me see, because that could be the most vulnerable. That could have the most mistakes, but you won't know until you play around with the different parameters. That's the best way to find out how an API works without the documentation. And then, even if it's internal. So that would be the only way to really test for that. And by manually digging into it and playing around and trying different parameters. And you can build yourself a map and a methodology how to go about attacking it from there.
All right. Will the SDN pen testing significantly differentiate from a common network pen testing? How much of a percentage would you estimate is different?
You said SDN?
It says, will the SDN pen testing significantly differentiate from a common network pen testing? If you had to put a percentage, how much different do you think it is?
If I had to put a percentage, maybe 60%.
Okay.
Maybe, if that.
All right. There's a request for you to put your contact page back up so people can get your information.
Oh, definitely. Look at that. Here we go.
There you go.
Excuse the cupheads in the background of the Smurf shirt.
I don't know if, did we get to this question? Somebody's asked, what about JWT? How is your approach to bypass them or test them? Did we talk about that?
Oh, I'm talking about web tokens.
Okay, so
talking about web tokens. So with web tokens, I usually use a Burp plugin. Burp has some awesome plugins But like with Burp, usually I use a lot of the like the JSON decoder, and it has like a JWT token plugin that I use to play around with to see how it's vulnerable. And then plus, of course, I use a lot of blogs and I use a lot of searches to see how I can actually attack JWT.
Okay.
Java Web Tokens.
All right, and with that, if there's no other questions, I think we've hit them all. Charles, there's also a request that you close out in your normal fashion, so you don't have to, but there's people asking for it. I'm gonna hit this button.
I will definitely do that. I love y'all all. Later. Yep.